This is Fan Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Adjanys Marrero for the first time. Welcome to the Fan Electric Ghost podcast.
So excited to be here. Thank you.
So, want to let people know that we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You can see the icon up there. And if you use coupon code GHOST and get 1 month free premium subscription, we will be on Newsly later tonight as an audio only version of the podcast. So you can check that out. And today we're going to be talking to you about this is the topic that we have a discussion today. So from fired to famed, unleashing the power of manifestation and creativity. And then we also have your website up. For those of you who are just listening, it's www.adjanys.com. That will be fully clickable. You'll be able to click through on that wherever we are published. And so just to let people know, if they actually go to your website, what would they find?
When you come to my website, you will see my photography to start off, and you'll also get like news updates and information about my podcast, also about my courses and my programs, because I do photography and metaphysics as well.
Well, that's awesome. So we want to let people know that that will be available there if they click through. We do encourage people to click through on the links that we provide for our guests that we talk to on the show. And this episode, to let people know, we're at 958 of the Fan Electric Ghost podcast. We've been on the air since 2018, tracking that on Apple Podcast. So again, thank you for being on the program. So maybe with that topic of fired to fame, unleashing the power of manifestation and creativity, maybe you want to start there in that subject and kind of give people a little background.
Yes. Okay. So I'll start with photography. I set out to be a photographer after I went through like a divorce and already had a baby. So I was an adult student. And so I was very focused on a particular outcome. And I give a lot of the credit to the success that I had, which is the famous part of the story, to my power of creativity. So for anyone listening out there that maybe doesn't feel like they have resources, this is the one resource that you have at your disposition. You have an abundance of it, and it's available to you and everybody, and it's creativity. And through creativity, I put myself through school. I made myself a well-known person unconsciously, but it was that sheer determination, just knowing that the more creative that I would be, and it was strictly photography at first, the more creative I was in my photography, then the more attention that I got. I became one of the first people in my school to have their own display, and it was just kind of wild, but I wasn't doing anything extraordinary. I was just really visualizing. I just really felt the power of creativity. And when you grow up with certain disadvantages, one thing that I learned from my mom was that you could be really creative with how you live. We lived in the hood, but if you walked through the doors of our home, it just looked like a magazine. It was just gorgeous once you got in the doors. Outside of the doors, people could be going through all kinds of stuff, and so within the poverty that we lived in and the challenges, we were separated in this cocoon, and my mom was very creative. And so that creativity is what really, I think, gave me an open door to do things that money or contacts would never be able to do for me, because I didn't have that. So I just imagined that I was going to be a famous photographer, and I don't even know how I got an email from a college that was like, hey, we have a new program. And I applied. I had no money. I was a single mom. And when I look back, it feels like a miracle. I'm like, how did that happen? But while I was going through it, the only thing that was consistent was that I was very creative, and I had the ability to hold the imagination of something better for my life. So I was doing manifestation before I even really understood. I was doing visualization and creative things because I felt it was part of my job as a photographer, but really it was part of the magic that led me to photography. So that's the beginning stages of how I got into photography. Later on, when I got into manifestation, I grew up in church. Was the church girl, and now I'm covered in tattoos because we rebel, we find something, and And I was that rebellious person who just, I didn't understand like how church worked, because I didn't see what the Bible said compared to what the people was doing. And I was
Yeah.
intelligent enough. I could see. So that said, my spiritual life, even as a Christian back in the day, led me to having my interest in God and those things. And that actually really opened the door for manifestation and the whole world of magic and energetics. But, later down the road, I managed to combine those two things. But that is the one thread that held it together, was my ability to be in a constant state of creating a fantasy around what my life could be like, what other things would be like if life was better. At no point, let me say, that I thought I was going to get any of these things. Not really.
Mm-hmm.
So that is really the curiosity that opened the door. I'm like, how can we use the mind to do this intentionally? Because I did it by accident for so many times, but I caught on, and that's where the journey begins.
I think that's very, it's a positive thing, because a lot of people don't value creativity in the arts. When I'm a musician, you can see behind me, I'm in my bedroom studio, and I've really been into music since I was like 12 years old. I'm 55, and a lot of people, they went through phases and they gave it up. I kept on going, and music brought me to this podcast. I mean, I'm a musician and I've got a bunch of other things going on, but music is the one thing that I felt was very cathartic for me. And I do music as a musician because I love it, not because I want to make $1 million. It's just something I love to do. And I found it a way to communicate. And it brought me to this world of podcasting and talking to influencers and talking to other artists. And it's just, to me, it's that the energy of being a creative person is that you take what you're scared of and you go into it. As a songwriter, we take the feelings that a lot of people are scared to verbalize, and we turn it into art. It's very cathartic for us to do it, and we do it whether we make money or not. We've got thousands of songs. A lot of artists I talk to they don't even show anybody, but it's part of their process, right? It's just part of being a creative person. Is like art is just kind of inside you, and to me, what I find is the people around you, that's like the law of attraction. People come to you if you're being positive and you're creative, then things start to happen. I think that maybe that's what happened with you. You were very creative, and then that kind of puts you on that path.
100%. I think that creativity is more powerful than anything else. And the reason I say that, I mean, there's a lot of science to prove that mental rehearsal, visualization, all these things have been tested, observed, and duplicated. And that's a science when we can do that. But what I think is fascinating is that it doesn't matter where you come from or your gender, which was a big struggle for me, because growing up in a very religious, strict Christian, Pentecostal environment, I couldn't do anything. I could not swear. I couldn't shave my legs. And you can imagine, as a 13-year-old coming into your womanhood, like, you don't want to be the hairy beast in class, And these were all things that I felt I was so restricted, and I couldn't understand why was the Bible telling me that I was free and I didn't feel that. But I was free in my mind, in my creativity. I was free when I could draw, and I wasn't trying to draw for anybody. I remember, I don't have too many memories of my childhood, but I do remember drawing a naked lady for a boy, and I think in like the 3rd grade. And I don't know if I sold that picture or not, but I think it was the first time that I realized, like, people like can't do this. Like, it wasn't, I think that you as a musician can understand that you're just like, I'm not even trying to make music. I cannot exist without it. And by the way, I envy musicians, because when I see a musician play a guitar or a piano and they forget the world, I feel like that's heaven on earth. And I still don't know how to play instruments. I want to. I'm like, I'm going to play an instrument someday.
You'll find it. Your instrument will find you.
It feels like you can transport yourself into an untouchable place. And I think
Yeah.
that is so powerful. I think that creativity is the missing key in what really makes manifestation powerful. And the whole beauty of it is that I want to use an example. I've used her a lot, but it's so powerful. Marilyn Monroe, we know her to be one of the most iconic women ever. She's died so many years ago, and we still talk about her, we still quote her, we still see her. She's very present. That's the idea of being famous, is being present to people way past her actual life. And this girl was raised in foster homes and abused. And how can we understand the power of visualization, which she tells her in her own words, that she would fantasize about being loved and adored, that she would hear in her imagination people give her compliments and turn her face and say, wow, that's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, all because she was in such an impoverished and neglectful environment that her soul cried out to something more. So what I love about creativity and manifestation is that it does not matter where you are, where you come from, what your situation is. You could be in jail and you have the power of creativity. Matter of fact, in jail, you have nothing else to do but to create your desire to get out of there, right? I can imagine. So creativity is, I feel creativity, we can call it so many things. I recently started calling it the doorway to miracles, because there's so many people who've spoken about this. And even the Buddha, he visualized in a way that led him to enlightenment. So it is quite an underused power that we all have. And I feel like artists, we have a secret, because that's what like makes life fun. Like, you don't have to be like a perfect person, right? You don't have to be an angel. You can curse, you can say all the things. I'm an artist, I'm crazy, but that's power.
Freedom.
Freedom. Yes.
Well, I think it's like the flow state. Part of what I'm really into is I'm into jazz a lot, or I'm into experimental music. I'm an experimental electronic musician. I play keyboards, play bass, and I do a lot of sound design. But what I like to do is, a lot of people in this world are so tied to perfection. And I'm a child of the 70s. I listened to a lot of 1970s and 60s music. And the one thing about that time period is, people like my hero, like Jimi Hendrix, he broke the rules. Hendrix played, a left-handed guitar. He restrung it, wasn't trained, taught himself listening to records, came up with all kinds of ideas that even today people don't even know how to do, right? He, engineers would come up to him and tell him, you can't do that feedback, you can't do these sounds. And he said, no, I'll go on the board and do it myself, right? So he just wanted that stuff to happen. And he just kept on playing until he got found. He just was, pushed that, beyond anybody's expectations. And he was found, in England. People found him and took him to England, and he came back. The British musicians, like, they found him, like the Animals, from the British group, the Animals. One of their drummers actually found him and said, this guy's fantastic. Then put him in front of John Lennon, McCartney, Clapton, Pete Townsend, all those people. And they're like, wow. And then the weird thing is, in the US, nobody was paying attention to him. He was playing with a lot of people, like Little Richard and stuff, but they would put him in the back. He got sent to England, he got pushed to the front. And sometimes, like, you got to not be scared. Hendrix wasn't scared to leave and go to England and come back. And I think sometimes, as an artist, you got to take, like, where the wind blows you. Sometimes you got to go. And he was willing to go, and he didn't know how that was going to work out. But, he came up the world's greatest guitar player to this day. And he broke all these rules. And that's one of the reasons I love his story, is because he didn't do things by the book. He wasn't trained at Berkeley, he just did it. He was a natural musician. He came from poverty. He just found it because it was inside of him, and he tapped into it. And I think that's the story a lot of people don't understand, is like, when you have that drive, it'll just happen.
And what's interesting about that, you said the music is inside. I recently saw a Lady Gaga quote that said that I was looking for quotes on particular visualization and how that would lead you to fame and things like that, because in order for me to help people understand how accessible this is, we got to listen to these stories. We got to hear people say, I just dreamed this stuff. I didn't have anything. I mean, J-Lo, all these people talk about, like, I just kept on, I just kept pushing, I just kept seeing it, I kept seeing it. Lady Gaga said something along the lines, I'll paraphrase, of course, but it was just like, at some point, it becomes a mantra, and you say, the music's inside you, the fame's inside you, you're writing a hit, it's working. And she said, it's a lie, but that lie one day becomes your truth.
Yeah.
And it gives me chills that we can apply something like creativity, something like imagination, something like visualization across the board if you want to reach enlightenment in the metaphysics, or if you want to just have good old-fashioned popularity. I'm 45 years old, right? So I remember watching cartoons like the Jetsons. I was like, one day we're gonna have flying cars. we don't yet.
It's coming though.
It's coming.
I see some idea. Yeah, I mean, it's so weird that people, like you said, that people put boundaries. Like
and
the
your
boundaries
imagination
put on women, like you said, they would be, and then you start saying, well, how could that be right when I don't feel free? And I think the cool thing about artists is we push the boundaries, no matter what form. Yeah, but no matter what form you're in, you're a poet, you're a photographer, you're a painter, you're a musician, artists always push it, and then we get in trouble sometimes because we don't do what is expected, because we're willing to kind of push the envelope in terms of language and culture and what's happening, and then you're on that kind of bleeding edge, and you can kind of get hit. And the thing is, being an artist, you got to be kind of willing to know that some people aren't going to like what you're doing. You're going to have haters, and for everybody anybody that does any kind of innovative thing, there's going to be people that say, well, that's terrible.
Absolutely.
And you have to be willing, like a lot of people, they don't have the self-confidence to get beyond that person that says they hate it, and then they just stop. And I don't know how many people I was around who had creative capability, but they let the haters stop them. And when the people I talked to here is like, they didn't let the haters stop them. They kept on going.
Yeah. Well, let me just interrupt you. I'm sorry about that. It's because the thing is that we let the fear rob us from our imagination, because most of us don't know how we're going to realize our dreams. So it's such a shame that it's not even that they stop us in our actuality. They even stop us from dreaming. And the very first step before we take any action, people are like, you got to take action. And I get that. Right. But I don't recommend you take action if you don't know where you're going. It's like getting in a car and just driving. Like, where are you going? I don't know. I'm just going to go. I think I'm going south. I don't know. I don't think that that's wise. I do think that if you want to go somewhere, you can go on the internet and start looking at places that look interesting to you. But that's what activating your imagination. That's your creativity saying, like, well, we can't just up and get in the car. We ain't got no gas money. But let's look at some photos. Where would we go? What can we do? And we stop ourselves at that point. We stop ourselves from dreaming. And I think that's why I really think this is a secret key. If people could understand the power of just imagining, you can have the worst abuse and have the worst people in the world. I want to use Oprah as an example. Oprah also comes from a impoverished, abuse, neglect, left behind, forgotten. And she often talks about how one teacher that believed in her, and the thing that teacher was able to give her was a new vision for herself. She could see herself in a different light, and look what, are you kidding me? Look what Oprah has done. And if we can go back to how these people started, how we all started, it don't make no sense that they've become these things that these people have and they can attain. And to your credit too, there's a lot of artists, like, there's different levels of fame, right? There's like fame on paper. There's like, you're known, your face is known. Sometimes your name is known. So artists sometimes are not known by their face. Sometimes they're composers. Sometimes they're behind the scene. My brother's a jazz musician. So when you said jazz, I just wrote jazz. I was like, oh, we got to tell him about your brother. My brother's a jazz musician. He does Latin jazz, experimental stuff. Guess what? I did the cover of his album. I'll send it to you when we're done so you can see it. You're going to love it.
Awesome.
And one conversation that we had, because I'm a photographer, he's a dress artist, we were talking about these deep stuff. And he was like, I think that we need to make a movement, right? Like we all feel this urge to do something. And I was like, why don't you make an album with that feeling instead of making it like a verbatim thing? You know, we have people who, my lighting's getting weird. I'm a photographer. I'm like, my light. we have people who are, you know, obsessed with the government not doing and all these things, but they're not creating something beautiful. My brother and I decided just for us to do some photos. We started talking ideas. He recorded an album. It took him a year to do it. We thought it was going to be for fun. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the works right now that I cannot talk about. Mm-hmm. But amazing opportunities have opened up for him. And we had no idea that this project, working together on something artistic, was going to lead to anything. We just fed our creativity. We're like, our creative monster was hungry. It was like, and instead of getting angry at the freaking government and doing, you know, outrageous things, we put it into our art and we made magic. And that, I mean, I cannot wait. I'm going to send you some samples of his stuff. Can't wait for you to hear it, because that is the power of imagining something more. That's the power of manifestation. And we're missing out. We're missing out because we're dropping the creativity. And it's easy to pick up. Hopefully these conversations that we're having are giving people ideas on how they can get back to something that's just for them. And I really loved when you said, you know, we don't do this for the money. We could, we have, but it's not for the money. It's for the soul.
Yeah. I mean, because the weird thing, you know, what I've always tried to do with my music is I do it because it's like inside me, or I feel like kind of like the poets, like the Victorian poets talked about this idea of the muse. And I kind of really got into it. I really like William Blake a lot. I like Tennyson. I like Wordsworth. And I like the fact that they would try in their time, they were talking about romance and sex, and they coded it in all these layers. And they were kind of getting away with things. You know, they would come up with ideas like literal death is actually talking about sex, but it doesn't say sex. So you wouldn't actually know that. And so they would get away with talking about sex and romance and put layers on it to kind of get away with in a time where people were kind of prudish. Oh, they can get into it. And so I always thought that was very interesting, that how you could layer with language and have people kind of try to uncover, you know, what you're doing. And as an artist and a musician, we try to create, you know, these, you know, I try to create what I call sound paintings, because I'm very visual. And Hendrix talked about it, and the Beatles talked about it, is this idea when you create music that you paint with your instruments like colors, like sounds are colors. And you can kind of visualize it, and it becomes this whole idea that you can paint these pictures in people's minds. And people hear music, they do get these visualizations in their head.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's just the idea of finding a way to connect to people, because you're being honest. Like if you're an artist and you play because you got the heart, then that heartfelt feeling finds an audience. No matter, you know, it just gets out there. And I think like any artist, when you create your piece, there's somebody in the world they're gonna feel that piece. They're gonna feel that photography. They're gonna feel what you did. And some people are scared of putting it out there, but you'll never know if you don't show it, if you don't bring it out, you know. And so I've always working with people, I always tell them, it's like, show me the piece that you're the most scared of. That you're the piece that you don't think anybody wants to hear. Don't show me the piece where you're trying to copy Beyonce or copy Taylor Swift or copy something because you think I want to hear that. No, I want to hear the piece that you're the most vulnerable in. Because that to me, that would be the core of who you are. And, you know, as a producer, I want to make somebody sound the best authentic version of themselves rather than a clone of somebody that's already out there.
Absolutely. You know? Clones don't get the fame and the glory. And because I always tell people this way, there's Jesus and there's the disciples. Which one are you? Are you going to be like Jesus or are you going to be like the disciples? Both are okay. They're both okay. But Jesus is walking on water and the disciples are telling stories of Jesus. Like, you have to understand how powerful this is, right? And I come from that Christian background. In the metaphysical sense, what we're talking about is you have a person who's tuned in and tapped into the power of their imagination. He imagined people healed and they were healed. Like, are you kidding me? This is ultimate power. And then you have the disciples who were there, they were moving the message forward, but they weren't doing the things that Jesus dared to do. Outrageous, complicated, mystical, unexplainable things. So who do you want to be at the end of your legacy? Like the disciple of like Jesus? And I know it could sound a little bit crazy to a Christian, but to someone that understands the metaphysics and the law of attraction, what I'm saying is, are you going to be great or are you going to talk about the greats? We can do both. Either way, it's going to be amazing. You could be a biographer and talk about the most amazing people in the world, and that could be your passion. But we know that every single one of us is coded for something really special and really unique. I think if everybody in the world did what was natural to them, for me, drawing was natural, photography was natural. It didn't feel like I had to learn it. I went to photography school because as a brown woman, I knew that I needed a piece of paper to get me in the door. But I knew what I could do because it was part of who I was. I was a photographer in my house. Out of 5 kids, I'm not in any of the pictures because I'm taking the pictures, right?
You're taking the pictures.
I'm taking the pictures. I'm like, I'm there. The behind the scenes, that's me, and the camera back here where you can't see it. I'm there in presence. And so it's just remarkable that sometimes the simplest things, right? The truth will set you free. You can take the most complicated human life and you can just allow them, just give them permission to dream bigger and see what they can do with that dream. We hold ourselves back because we don't dream big enough.
Yeah. I mean, because I think your story about, leaving the corporate world after, you were kind of pushed out because you were pregnant, and that's an injustice to me. And, I've been in corporate America. In my day job, I am a software designer. And I tried to play the game of being in these big Fortune 500 companies. And what I ended up doing is becoming a consultant, because then I was like, I want to do my art. So I found a way. So I do software design as a consultant, and I'm not playing that boardroom game where I just do the work because I like consulting because I can do it and people either like it or they don't. And I just get renewed or I don't. And I don't have to play the game of trying to get to be a VP or do this and do that, trying to go up the ladder. Like, no, I just do the work for hire and then I do my art. So then I got off the treadmill. I don't have to fly around the world. I used to have to fly all over the place and be in Ubers and jets and get stuck somewhere. And I said, you know what? Now I can just be home in my art studio and I do my work. And so now I can do 50% of my time doing my music and my art and 50% doing the other stuff. So then before I was doing it was all like 90% doing what they wanted and 10% to doing my art. And I was like, I can't do that. I want to do more. And so
how did that affect you? How do you feel that you're like, what is your mental health and your emotional state now that you have so much freedom versus when you were like working for the mayor?
I just feel more calm. People say I'm not as freaked out.
Oh,
if you're in the jet, like if you're flying Sunday to Thursday and you're only home for 3 days and then you got to fly back out and then you're rushing around, you're not eating right.
Like you're frazzled.
You're in hotels, you're not eating right. My health, I lost weight. I probably lost like 30 pounds, less stress. My blood pressure went down. My numbers all my numbers got better. And I just, became more productive. I've released tons of material. I do tons of podcasting. I do a lot of art and I do my work. But all that, being a road warrior was not really productive for me. It was like maybe the companies liked it, but it was
right?
but it wasn't really doing what I want. And now I feel better about what I want to do because I'm able to do more of it. I'm able to do way more art than I was able to do before. So the people have to find that balance. Like, what are you doing it for? Why are you in the rat race? if the goal, if you're not happy, if every day you're doing it, but you're not happy, you got to
It's a
look in the
trap.
mirror and say, what's got to change?
You know what's interesting though? You could be in the world of shit. Ooh, could I curse?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
could be in the, okay. I cursed like a sailor, but I didn't know. I was like,
That's
hold
okay.
back, girl.
We're
Hold
okay.
back.
No, we're okay.
The interesting thing is that you could be in the crappiest job and start to apply this work. Let me tell you a quick story. I was in a crappy job. I first moved to LA, and LA is a beast, right? You can't come out here and think like I made it. No, LA's gonna whoop your ass. You think I had so much money within 3 months. I had no money. I was like, who ate my money? So
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. So I got a shitty job because you got to survive. You can't just be like, well, Jesus, take the wheel, and homeless in the street, right? Like we have capabilities to survive, and we're intelligent. I'm a mom. I was like, okay, got a bad job. I was working at Ross after being a fashion photographer, magazines, like billboards, and it's a humbling experience, but it's so much leverage when you just like you just say fuck it and just do it. You're just like, okay, I need a job. Got the within a month of working for Ross, I had a better job within a month because I was willing to say, I'm not gonna just sit here. I'm not a spoiled brat. I want to be, but I'm not. I got to take care of myself, and if I don't take care of this, I'm gonna end up in the streets or have to move in with my mom. Which, remember, I told you they Pentecostal. I ain't going back to that
Yeah,
life.
yeah, I do that.
That's like going to prison. I'm good. I'll be homeless first. No, I'm just kidding. My mom's amazing. But there is these restrictions. So within a month of Ross, I got a job at LAX. And I actually worked at a really nice part of LAX, the international one. I actually went from like a cashier at Ross, barely making any hours, making I think $8 an hour. I mean, come on, like you think I was surviving? I think $200. I think I bought all my food from the dollar store because I was like, ooh, 200 things when the dollar store was $1. But nonetheless, within a month of that, I had a better job. And I was able to hold down an LAX job and actually was hired as a marketing manager. So I went from cashier to like a pretty good. I doubled my salary, not the best thing in the world, but $16 over 8, I'll take it. And in that time, I could have enough stability, right? Sometimes people don't want to do the work because they feel like their settling is permanent. But you got to be strategic, because I was like, well, I need to eat and I need to pay my rent. So I need to take care of business. So while I was working at this job I wasn't going to go anywhere with this job, I was visualizing, I was doing the manifestation practices, I was throwing spaghetti at the wall, I was doing it all. And I remember that when things started to really click, I was visualizing every day on a consistent basis. I was like, I am a photographer. I'm getting a photography job. I came to LA to be something. And you know what they did? Within a month, they fired me. And so what happens is people get confused when their life change. I was like, wait a minute, this is not good. But what I did instead was, okay, I gave myself 30 days. I said, I got 30 days to be in LA, get a job, do something. And I just went crazy visualizing what I wanted. But what I did not do was make it bad. What I did was I had fun. I was almost out every night. I was like, I don't have a job. So every time my friends asked me out, I was like, let's go. I went out every night. I dated. And for an entire month, I was at one side, like holding on to like, please give me a job, somebody. And I still was like, fashion photographer. Within 30 days of getting let go, I actually, a company contacted me and said, we want you as a photographer, hired me. And I was a full-blown marketing photographer for a big company. I can't say their name because that's the company that fired me for being pregnant. So I had to sell my soul to the devil and keep their secret. I'll reveal the secret one day. I don't care. I have a lot of courage. But it was my sheer determination to go back to photography that got me an enormous position. And it was just within a month of just really focusing on this. So there is nothing in my personal experience that I have not been able to get over without the help of just being creative, of just allowing the pure creativity to just flow through my life, because it's such a part of my identity. But it is really what I think that the intellects are missing. They're
Yeah.
missing all the fun, you know?
Well, it's like the manifestation, right? Like part of, you know, in my career, I've run into situations where, I was in corporate world and they got pushed out and I did this and did that. And then I was actually in Tokyo for like 2 years. And I
Wow, I
was in
love
this
that.
thing where I was trying to get to this director level. And then, then I got pushed out and I'm like, okay, there's, there was people that didn't, I ran into that kind of glass ceiling kind of issue that you run into
Mhm.
that you can understand. That like I walk in the room and I'm the only one that looks like me, right?
Ooh, I ran into a lot of those
And
rooms.
and they, and in the IT world, everybody thinks, oh, that's like IT, so they don't do that. But yeah, they do.
They
So
do.
so 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 the problem is they, I don't look like Bill Gates. I don't look like Steve Jobs, and they want me to look like that, and I don't look like that, right? So they think that that's what the prototype for that type of person is.
That's
So
right.
you don't have a lot of women in the room. You don't have a lot of minorities in the room or people from other cultures. And so I say, you know what? I was fighting that battle, and then I say, you know what? I'm just gonna kind of just be at peace with and do a lot of my art and see what I can do. And I kind of got to this place where I wasn't so desperate. Because I think what happens with like
Mm,
the law of attraction, if you get desperate and you start losing your belief in your art and the manifestations, like I did a lot of work with my art, and then suddenly other opportunities on my other side of the work, like the software stuff, started happening without me trying to stress about it. Not that I wasn't looking, but I wasn't stressing out and freaking out. And I think that's the kind of balance that there's a lot of metaphysical stuff, a lot of spiritual stuff in the world that you can't quantify on a chart,
you can't.
but you've got to kind of be in a mind state that if you're in a mind state where there's a lot of desperation, things aren't probably going to happen that well. If you get to a mind state where you start to have some kind of peace, I'm a Buddhist. I practice like a Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism, and I was doing my chanting, I was doing my Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and I was into that, and I just made sure that I was like okay. You
Hmm.
have to kind of give yourself
Hmm.
in a balance. And I find when I was like totally Christian, I didn't have that way of solving those problems. I didn't have a way of meditation and mindfulness and kind of understanding that allowed me to be where I am now, where a lot of things just happen in kind of this flow state of
Yes.
being and being willing to allow things had to happen and go with it, and it's like, whoa, I you didn't, you can plan things and then there's things that happen and you got to be willing to take
Absolutely.
advantage of those things that happen and not be scared to do it. And
I,
I think when you have a
yeah,
more open mind,
absolutely.
you can get there.
And I think that's really important. The last piece you said, open mind. I think that when we stifle our creativity, our intellect suffers, because our intellect and our creativity are supposed to be like, you know, Siamese twins type of thing. They're not supposed to operate individually. You have a person that strictly operates from fantasy. We call that person crazy, right? We have a person who operates strictly from logic. We call that person maybe cold and not emotional. So the extremes are never good. Um, but I think that manifestation with many teachers, what we are missing is that we made it about getting stuff, not about feeling a certain type of way.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I've had quite a few clients, because not that I'm not pursuing money, but it does change. I found myself in the world of manifestation as a coach. Right now, currently working on a PhD in metaphysics and transpersonal counseling. I was like, give me all the give me all the transpersonal counseling. Give me all that. Like, let's go talk to the angels. Let's just go into the other realms. But it's never just to stay there, right? For me, I think that the idea of coming into the earth means that you need to learn to be this divine being in a human form. Like, you have to have an elevated responsibility for being a human. And we get that messed up with manifestation, because the world split into spirituality, like metaphysics, manifestation, and then it was like step 1, gratitude, step 2, high five your child, step 3, chant. And when we made it about rules, and I was a part of it, we made it about rules and made it about stuff. We didn't make it about the substance of changing into a better human being. Because I'm gonna use a little Bible metaphysics, y'all. Don't get scared. The Bible says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God." If we translate that, that means look for the good things, look for the expanded things, seek that, seek the improvement of life in general. I think manifestation has become so self-centered, and we've forgotten why we want to create a better life for ourselves, for a better world. Like, who cares? Honestly, I'm coming from this perspective. I'm like, I don't care if I make $1 million and everyone I know is destitute. Like, how are we taking the law of attraction, something so beautiful, a spiritual law, and making it about capitalism? Now, trust me, I like money just like anybody.
About sales. There's a lot of people. Yeah, they've turned into like salespeople. Like I've seen a
Absolutely.
lot of people that take these like metaphysical ideas and then turn it into to pushing widgets or
Oh,
pushing
yeah.
numbers. And my whole point, with a lot of musicians is, well, you could do this and you can make 1 million selling this song. And I'm like, well, I don't like that song because it doesn't really move me. Right. And I know I could do a formula that could get to a song that can make a lot of money, but I don't actually think it means anything. It doesn't speak to me. It doesn't say
Absolutely.
anything. And I'm like, I'm not into that. I'd rather do something like, like Sun Ra. I mean, I'm more of an experimental musician. And
Yes.
if I do something that's like Lou Reed or like, something that's like very underground kind of mindset, like an MF Doom or something, I'm going to do something that's more like going to speak to my heart. And if
Yes.
people tend to find it, and then what I found is like if you do that, you'll find an audience. I've actually had some Grammy award winning producers find me, and I don't have a big
Absolutely.
name, but they
Well,
they
that's
they
because of
they
your
liked what I was
fame.
doing. They liked what I was doing, and I wasn't trying to push a name and say I'm in the top.
That's right.
I'm not in the top 10 of anything. But my whole point was I just do what I feel, and then when other
Absolutely.
people feel it, then it happens. And
It's powerful.
yeah, people will be surprised how many good things happen when you actually are authentic. And if you are
Absolutely.
authentic and you're really pushing out what you believe, and it's a positive experience, and it's like law of attraction. It's not necessarily
Yes.
going to show up as you think it should. It
Right.
will show up, and I get a Rolodex of people I've talked to. To me, that's my gold. The people I've talked to on this
Absolutely.
show, my connections with other human beings have actually enriched me more than any money. And
Absolutely.
and that's where people are like, well, how much money did you make? It's like, that's not the point.
Um, yeah, not the point. I think that it's a beautiful thing when you spoke of authenticity, and I think that authenticity could save your life. Authenticity will save your life, because as a person who has worked with people in certain industries with certain degree of fame and different levels, right? In photography, you have people who are like famous amongst photographers. Nobody else knows who they are, right? Like, I'm sure that's the same thing across all genres, all across all ways. Musicians do that all the time. They're like, that's so and so, and you're just like, I don't know who that is. Oh, that person produced this song, and you're like, my brother talks about, my
Yeah,
brother's played with amazing jazz players, and he was like, oh, I played with this guy and this guy and this guy, and I'm just like, I don't know who these people are, but the jazz people know,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
one
They know.
one thing I speak on. Like, there's a way to gather sacred, what I call sacred fame, because it's for a good purpose, for a good mission, is to move the divine mission forward. So that in that sense, right? God is famous, Jesus is famous, Buddha is famous because they're known, but they're known for pushing perhaps a positive agenda over a selfish agenda, right?
Yeah,
And so I think authenticity will save your life. It's happened to me so many times, because when you're authentic, you're actually not a liar. You're not pretending. You make a mistake, you're like, oops, sorry. Like, you're so it's literally like what we call like being real, right? And
Yeah.
what I've noticed with some people in certain industries, I have worked with some musicians as a photographer, not, but I've been around that. I'm like, when people tell me that, like, I want to work celebrities, I was like, you've never worked with a celebrity. That's how I know, because you think they're just going to give you money. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
They're
it's a
not what you,
fantasy. Yeah.
they're not who you think they are.
And
You
they're just
know,
people,
they're people, but
literally.
yeah, they're not always perfect. They're not
No,
very, you might have this kind of unrealistic vision of who they are. And then you
exactly.
get surprised about the flaws or the
Exactly.
character that they have that's not as inviting as you thought. Because
That's the
a lot of
authenticity. Hmm.
what you do is like it's a mask. A lot of what we do in
Absolutely.
music is we have to have a lot of theater. There's a lot of theater in
That
what
makes sense.
we portray to the audience.
I
And
gotta write
a
that
lot of
down.
that is not exactly like who you are. It's kind of like Frantz Fanon, like Richard or Mask. We have masks,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
people get confused and they think that that mask is the person. That's not necessarily who they are. That's
Absolutely.
who they, it's like a lot of
Want you
musicians. If
to
you go on
see.
stage, you talked about that zone. Like, yeah, I get into a zone, and you could ask, if you asked me after I played for a half hour, like what I was doing, like I kind of got into a trance, right? And I
Absolutely.
don't remember what I was doing. And so
You're
like you
like,
get into this zone and it's not exactly who you are day to day when you're at the
absolutely.
supermarket or you're walking around. It's not who you are. And people think you're like that 100% of the time. Like you might only be like that when you're on stage. And then
Yeah,
they
they
think
kind
you're
of
like that all
remove
day.
they remove the
Yeah.
humanness from someone who's got some degree of popularity, which is, I was like, wait, I thought a lot of us follow people and become fans because of their realness, right? How many times we're like, yo, this, she's real, he's real, and that's why we follow them, that's why we admire them. But to your point with authenticity, it's like, I know that in some industries, for example, I've worked with some producers and they're telling me how they want me to photograph that person has no say over what goes on the cover, what it looks like, whether that's really authentic to how they look. And I can't
Mhm.
even pull out an authentic, like, thing from them because they're being directed by somebody else,
Yeah, they got
so they
image
don't
makers.
necessarily have the voice. Yeah. And so what I mean, authenticity will save your life, is that what happens with some people who gain popularity or celebrity or whatever is that they had to put on this pretend face all these years, and they finally are like, I can't do it anymore, and they
Yeah.
take it off, and then people are disappointed, like what you were
Yeah.
talking about. People are just like, oh, he was so nice and now he's a jerk. And it's like, no, he got tired of pretending. The mask got too heavy for his face. And then if we are authentic, we don't ever have to put on that mask as much as we can help it, because sometimes we put on a mask and we don't know that we did it, unconsciously.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as much as we can help it, if we just take that off every day, it's that mask every day through process of meditation and centering yourself in some way, you remove those layers of the mask, and it makes you more authentic and more authentic. And there's no, like, apologizing for authenticity, right? It's like, am I gonna apologize for having curly hair? Like, it's a
Yeah.
non-issue. You just are. This is who you are. You're free to be. And I think that when you're more authentic, you're more forgiving. You understand the pressures that other people may be going through. You understand that you maybe have tuned into and tapped into something that not everybody has mastered. Being authentic is not, it's the easiest thing in the world because it's just being you, but we've all taught to put our mask on, you
Yeah,
know?
well, I think a lot of people find it very fearful. Like it's
Hmm.
interesting because it potentially is the easiest thing to do. But then, like, if you're a singer songwriter and you come out there and you're like, you're like a James Taylor, or you're like a kind of, you feel like, oh, that's him. That's who James Taylor is, right?
That's
So he
right.
get it fire and rain and everything. But when he did his biggest song, right, he was like addicted, he was sad, he was melancholy. His biggest material was when he was in a really bad state, right?
Mm,
Then when he got married and he got happy, he did an album that didn't have the melancholy, and the
mm,
critics panned him. And he's like, wow. It's like when I finally got happy and my people didn't like my art. They only liked my art when I was sad in a bad place and I was on heroin. It's
Oh
like,
my God.
so you're like, but that's the trap that some artists get into, because
That's right.
sometimes they get into this thing where they created their work from the crucible moment,
Oh yeah,
and then they
absolutely.
find the audience only wants their work when they're in that crucible moment. So then they end up having to stay in a crucible moment constantly, and
Absolutely.
it's bad for you,
It kills
because
you.
like if you yeah, you can never be, if you can't be happy, then you end up exiting, because
Absolutely.
that's where
And
people
your work
expect
has
you to
no
be.
soul. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
so
that
you have to
happened when
find the balance.
absolutely. When I was working in photography, like corporate, when I was like the head photographer for Dillard's, I was shooting every day, all the time, nonstop. Now that made me an amazing photographer because I was like, this is the best. It was my first job. It was a huge deal. So I was like, this is the best paid internship. It wasn't a paid internship. I was making a full salary, but I didn't know what I was doing. I had just graduated college and I was just taking pictures with my friends for a couple years. And now I am the head photographer for a corporation like Dillard's. And I walk into the room and had the very familiar experience of being the only person that looked like me, inclusively. I had situations where I created advertisement because I had a lot of creative freedom. Once I started to see what I could do, they were like, okay, this girl, we'll give her a little bit more. And so when you work for corporate, you also have a lot of rules. You can't do this on white background. Don't smile. Not too sexy. Not too stiff. Not too.
Mm.
I'm shooting 14-year-olds with grandma clothes on. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. This girl's 15. We got her on like these old granny suits on. Like, what are we doing? Right. So what happened with me in fashion as well was I started to challenge whether I wanted to be telling these messages with my photography, that women that are buying, like, they're in their 50s, 60s, they're being advertised by a 15-year-old, which is a completely insane thing to do. One day I ran an ad and I was like, I got it. I got this great ad and I was so proud of it. It was dun dun dun, an interracial couple. And I said, well, listen, it is 2000 something. It is time. It was Florida because I was the head photographer of the Southeast Division, so it encompassed the southern states. You know what I mean? Georgia,
Mm.
Alabama.
Oh,
Give me all the southern states, all
yeah.
Kakalaki. Everything south was mine, and I was like, I've made it. But I did notice that none of the models were Black, and if the models were Black, they were half Black. And I always have a problem with the
Mm.
most beautiful woman in the world is half Black. They're like, she's the most beautiful Black woman. And I was like, well, I thought she was half Black. Well, we don't count the white part. I was like, why not? I have interracial children. I want them to be proud of both of their parents. I don't want them to have this dilemma, right? It just doesn't, the world did not make sense to the type of brain that God gave me. And so I said, got it. I got the best ad in the world, right? We had this girl. She was Black enough for Dillard's at the time because she was half Black, half white. She was gorgeous, long curly hair, beautiful skin, just perfect in every way. And I was like, let's get a white guy in here. Let's ruffle some feathers, because you also see the stereotype of the Black man with the white woman. So I just really wanted to
Yeah,
start
push it.
because
Yeah,
I
push
have
it a little bit.
family that looks
Yeah.
all kinds of way. My father-in-law, his wife is Hawaiian and she's from Japanese descent. My cousins are in Australia. They're married to Australian women. I have a cousin in Sweden that's married to a Swedish. Like, we have no way to just be like this or that. It's all
Mhm.
this. We are literally, my family is worldwide.
Mhm.
So that kind of stuff didn't make sense to me. And I was like, let's bring it to the picture. Let's bring it here. Let's bring it here. And it was like stabbing me, not in the back, in the front to my face. When I got the girl in, shot her, got the guys, we got these gorgeous shots, and they killed the ad. And let me
Mhm.
tell you why they told me that I couldn't run this ad. This is the South. That's the excuse. I
That
was
was
like,
cute.
oh my God, what am I doing? But still very proud that I pushed the envelope, and I pushed. And whether it got picked up or not as the ad, they did do the girl by herself. They just took the white guy out of there. But
Mhm.
I tried, and so I feel proud of that moment.
Yeah. Well,
You know what I'm
you know,
saying?
they didn't have the imagination. There's like there is a segment of the market that would have dealt with that, but they
No,
weren't
and
willing to push. They weren't willing to push it because they're so. The problem I see is the people who complain. They would speak really loud, but they might not have a lot of numbers.
ooh.
The problem is they're very loud and they appear to be bigger than they are, and so they push the buttons and maybe they call the right people. But you probably would have been able to get that through, but their people don't have the courage.
They didn't have
What
the
I find is they
courage.
don't have the courage to have somebody call the CEO and complain from Alabama or Tennessee or Virginia or Mississippi, and they complain and then they push the button. But like, how many other people didn't call and actually thought it was cool?
Well,
Say that,
I know so many
that's the problem.
interracial couples. Yeah.
Yeah,
Here's the thing, working in the fashion industry, when I was working consistently in it and I was in Florida, um, the interracial models were the new up and coming. The market, we saw the market. They're like, people are interracial, they're getting
it's happening.
together, they're
Yeah,
loving each other. So we have a segment of children who are half this, half that, third quarter this, third quarter that,
well, their
and
sales
they
might
were,
have gone through the roof. I mean, their sales, like they made a decision because people had you know, those voices were amplified, but they didn't even make monetary sense, right?
it,
Because the
they
problem
had
is,
no imagination.
yeah, there's no imagination, there's a lot of fear.
A
What
lot
I
of fear.
find is people have the fear, and you could point out, and the people have pointed out to people
Oh
that, you know,
yeah,
there was a study that racism costs the US like trillions of dollars every year. But they would have you think that that's the opposite.
that's right.
But they don't understand the markets that they lose. They don't
That's
understand the
right.
money they lose. They make assumptions and they never see it really happen because they're not willing to push it. And they would actually see more profits if they weren't
Absolutely.
so narrow-minded. So
I
that's
think
why
that
entrepreneurs have opportunities to go out and
absolutely.
do what they won't do. You know?
And here's the thing, nor do they, nor do we need them to, nor do they we want them to, because if they're doing it inauthentically, that it's not for like the actual reasons, then they're just using
Yeah,
the race thing to make money, which is perpetuating the problem,
yeah,
which is, you shouldn't be using women's insecurities to sell lotions. You shouldn't be using people's appearances, skin color, to sell them products and things they don't need. That was a big reason why, when I got let go from this big company that shall remain unknown for now, um, I was upset about it. It was unfair. It was absolutely a crime, but it was a call from my soul, because sometimes it's God doing for you what you can't do for yourself. Sometimes you got to get fired because you're not going to quit. You're not
mhm,
going to quit because, you know, your job got your pocketbook and it's got you convinced that you cannot make it without them. You have that fear. But I want to give, I know that we're coming close to the end. Are we coming close to the end? I want to
yeah,
give
yeah,
the people here advice as to what to do if you're in a completely shitty life right now. I would say start dreaming. I would say you pull out your notebook every night, and this is what I call it. I call it think like a rapper. I grew up in the 80s and 90s when rapping wasn't what it was now. And you
mhm,
had kids that had nothing, no money, no aspirations, drug addicted money, violence all over the world. And they saw for themselves something bigger, and they sang about it and they wrote about it and they saw it and they made videos about it, and they became millionaires and they changed the world. Because rap right now, it's like what jazz
is
and blues and all these things did for music, right? Am I
yeah,
talking to the
it's like
right
the rock
person?
and roll. Yeah,
It's like rock
it's
and
the rock
roll.
and roll. It's the rock and roll in this era. I mean, it's the primary mover. You know, in the industry, hip hop and rap is the
It,
top. It's bleeding in to, you know,
everywhere.
pop is it pulls in to pop. It's in country. You know, jazz has gone into it. I mean, jazz
Jazz is
was
in it.
always there,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of jazz musicians are working with hip hop producers because it's like, okay, if we want to continue to show the kids like where this kind of started, you know, guys like Sun Ra were into spoken word in the
Mm,
50s. Some of the early jazz bands,
mm.
Coltrane, they actually had spoken word kind of raps in their jazz. There's a lot of jazz that had that kind of poet kind of sentiment.
Yes,
There's a lot of poetry in early jazz from the 50s and 60s that a lot of these hip hop producers actually are like, wow, jazz is kind of aligned with where we are because they were
absolutely. It is
talking.
poetry.
They were
Hmm.
reading poetry and having spoken word and not singing, but actually reading off poems within the middle of jazz pieces. And so, yeah, there's a lot of connection. But yeah, I think a lot of people, you need to check out your website, the www.adjanys.com, to connect with you. And again, maybe tell the people what they find there if they connect to that website.
If you are interested in starting to use metaphysics to change your life, now you can use photography too, because I take photos, amazing photos for branding, and especially for people who are in intuitive businesses. But what you can find in my website is access to what I'm up to. You can see my photography, my portfolio, and also you'll have probably a list of all my curriculums and all the things that I teach according to metaphysics. Right now, I'm really focusing on fame, specifically sacred fame, because the world needs people with good hearts, with good messages, with good missions to be known. And it's not the ego, it's not selfish, it's because we have medicine that the world could drink. And it's selfish if we have the answers and don't give it to people willingly, freely, without charging. People can have listen to this conversation with you and I and get so much from it, just from this, and it's 100% from the heart. I can tell that you do this because you love it, and I'm so excited, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. And this will be everywhere the podcast are watched or listened to, or on like 15, 16 different platforms. And so your audience will be able to check that out tomorrow when we give you the landing page. But again, thank you for being on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. I'm looking
Thank
forward
you.
to listening to your brother's work. And yeah, it's cool. Maybe we'll have him on the show later because I always do that. You can work something out. We can connect it to my calendar or something. But yeah, that's
Absolutely.
cool. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
and have a good night.
Bye.